Okay, good morning everyone. We're going to talk about the records, but first off, who am I? I typically get asked, what do you do? Because you do so many things. And I typically tell people I develop things and talk about them. So I'm a software developer, most of the time within ING. I'm also a part-time developer advocate where I help my colleagues, but also people outside my company get better at engineering or engineering culture. And I'm co-organizing many events, both internally but also externally, including the Java User Group Noord, which is one of the newest ones, maybe the newest for the Netherlands. So if you have a chance to be in the Noord or you would like to start speaking, or you are a speaker and would like to come by, feel free to reach out to me. However, we're not to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Java records. Quick question, anyone here already using Java records, I hope? Good. For those that don't use them yet, I hope you're not on Java 8 or 11 anymore. It's around since Java 16, 17 LTS, or 21 or 25, depending on what you're using. What they do is that they act as a transparent carrier for immutable data. And that led to some confusion with one of my colleagues. So that made me decide I should do a talk about this. But what they do is that you get a lot of things for free. People used to use Lombok for this, or if you use Kotlin, you have the data class as well. But you get a canonical constructor for free, toString, hashcode, equals, etc. You can override them if you think I want it in a different way. But you get this without writing any code, which is what we like, because typically POJOs is just data, and we write them once, don't look at them that often anymore. So the way they look is like this. You don't use class, you type record, you pick a name, and you add the fields that you want to include there. So all these fields are shallowly immutable. You can't change them afterwards unless you create a new record instance. So what you use them for is to, at least what I use them for, is to use cognitive load. And because I do like engineering culture and helping engineers get better at reading and writing code, it helps a lot to understand what's happening in the code, because you no longer have that really big class, you just have one line that explains you this is what's happening. It's all predictable as well. So typically you use them to transport data between objects or other applications or within your application a component. They also offer some memory and performance benefits if you do high-speed, high-volume, but you really need to do a lot of high-speed, high-volume. So for most cases, this will not apply for the typical things that we build. But if you do work on them, do look at those, because it's not really syntactic sure. It's really a specific class that uses less bytecode as well. And in some cases, you may want to get rid of Lombok, because Lombok was nice when you had Java 8 or 11, but nowadays with modern Java, it's no longer that useful. And it does add upon what you're building. Records are native within Java, so you don't have any of the downsides of Lombok coming along. However, when you migrate, you might run into some issues, because you might have thought that your code was immutable, but it turned out it's not. Which I think is a good thing, because at that point you will fix your code. You may have some unknown issues that, well, eluded your attention while building the application, because nothing broke, so everything was fine. But you shouldn't use records when you want to hide fields, like passwords, customer data that perhaps shouldn't be visible outside your application, because everything is transparent. All the data inside, all the fields, you can read those and see those. Also, if you need mutable data, you could abuse it. I will show you how that happens, but you shouldn't do that, because again, the cognitive load will be high. Records should be immutable. So if you do need mutable fields, just use POJOs like you did before. And you could even use Lombok if you want to. So the reason why I came up with this talk is because one of my colleagues came to me. I had a record, he said, and I have a list in it, and I can add items, and I can remove items. What's going on here? Records should be immutable, right? But they're not. The fields that you supply to a record, those are immutable. It's shallow immutable. It isn't immutable at the moment that you put in an object that is mutable, because that object, if you have a reference, so in this case you have an array list, and we all know an array list you can add remove stuff. I can pick the instance, I can pick the box here, and I can add remove items to that box object. So I can say get contents.add or .remove, etc. This is very confusing. You can create bugs with this because you were expecting it was immutable, but in this case it is not. So to prevent this from happening, you can do multiple things. You can build defensive constructors like I'm doing here, which means that I will replace a value with a default value at the moment that it's not within my scope, so within my domain. I would always expect a label to be there, so I can add a default value. And in the case of the list, a list copy of, for those that don't know it, will always create an immutable list. The nice thing about this, because I talked to Stuart Marks, one of the Java architects, about this at last DevOps Belgium, is that copy of is free after the first copy. So as soon as I have an immutable list, it is just copying a pointer. It's no longer copying the contents of the list. I wasn't aware of this. I was thinking, like, if I have a list of like millions of objects, that would be quite costly to copy all the time in your constructor. But this, and I will, if I have some time left, also show you how fast it will be. The second and third copy will be free because it's just copying the pointer to the existing. Despite the name, it won't really copy, but it will send you the pointer back. Another thing that's good to know is that this constructor, it doesn't have any parameters. And I can adjust the data. So before the constructor ends, the data that I'm supplying is still mutable. As soon as the constructor ends, so the bottom line, everything in this record is immutable at that point. So the other option that you have, and this is like checked exceptions, which is quite a debate, is that you are throwing exceptions. I don't want this. So if you supply a list that's, well, mutable, you could add items, you could throw an exception at that point. And as you can see, IntelliJ doesn't really like it because I get a brownie on a catch, which is the expected situation, because I don't want to drop out when I can't mutate the list in this case. But this is a lot of cognitive load, so I don't like this too much. So nowadays, typically I tell people, make a copy of a list if you want an immutable list or set or map, etc. You can also combine these. So for example, if you always need to have a label and you're unable to think of a default value, then yeah, do an illegal argument exception at this point. So you're forcing the developers, if you test well, you will see this in the test coming up, and of course we all test well, right? That should help you fix the issue fast. Fail fast and then move forward at that point. Again, cognitive load. You don't want to create issues that service half a year from now. That's causing issues for us, because typically when we build code, it's in our mind for 1 or 2 weeks, and then it's unfortunately seeps away a tiny bit. Another issue that you have if you want to do true immutable data is if you want to copy some fields. So for example, I have a box. In a box, the box size typically doesn't change, but a box can have different contents. I can change the label, for example. The pattern that we typically use here is creating a widder. The downside is it's not available yet. So there was some discussion about this within the Java architect team. I did make an example for this to actually show everyone this. It's a JAP 468, and it should have been available in preview. And I counted up to 25. It's still not in 27 at the moment. It's being discussed, and it was, I think, in 2023 or 24. They parked it without any follow-up. So they are considering it, but if it will take the same shape as that you just saw, so the width field, so you have the original record that you created, and you want to only change 1 or 2 fields. It will come in this shape more or less, but they're not sure yet. And when we will get it, it's probably the next LTS. Now let me switch back to the sheets. If you don't want to write a code, and code is cheap nowadays because we have AI, we have a lot of good tooling, then you could also consider still using Lombok with the @width annotation that does take care of it for you. It works both on the class level, on the record level, or on the field level if you want. But if you're doing it on the field level, maybe just write the code yourself. Otherwise, you will have to add and use Lombok at that point. One thing I really like, and that's what I discussed with Victor and Thea as well in DevOps UK last year, is typically you don't adjust all the fields. So you have to think about your domain. And in this case, you can use semantics. So if I change the content, my label might change, or just the content might change. So I need two helper functions. I don't need to write all those withers. I don't need Lombok to have something like that set up. So in this case, I'm already done with these two methods. Only replacing the values that I need to replace, and then returning, like a factory pattern, the new object. In this case, a new record. I personally like this more because it makes you think as a developer about the domain that you're building and the value that you're creating for the end users, which might be you, might be another party, might be the business users within your company. You could, of course, also add builder with Lombok, then you don't have to type this all out. But again, we have LLMs nowadays, so you could just tell an LLM, create a builder for me, and it's done. The downside is it's a lot of code again. And typically with domain objects, with POJOs, you don't want to read all that code. That's why records are nice, because they only show you the fields that are relevant. If I'm adding a builder, like you see here, that's a lot of code I have to read through again. I also have to minimize it to actually fit on the screen, for example. And that distracts. And POJO shouldn't be taking our time, business logic should be taking our time to reason about and think about. And records should be helping you with this. So if you decide to migrate to records, you can do that at once with everything or just with a few. Typically, I would advise people to just start with a couple of modules with a specific domain so you know what's going on. You can use your IDE. Typically, I do use IntelliJ, and well, it even offers you a squiggly that says, hey, this can be a record. As long as your Java level is above 16, if you set it in your IDE, it will tell you, oh, the fields that you're using now, just make it a record. You can also use open rewrite, which I personally really like because it's helping you in a deterministic way to finish up the code and always get the same results, the same outcomes. And they have a nice recipe for this that's called Lombok value to record. So if you look for that, you will also see how to run it on your application. And this one typically moves the value one over to a record and then removing all the Lombok stuff from it. Up to a couple of months ago, they also didn't do the method references like the double dots, but it's been resolved by now. And that's working quite well. So if you want to do your entire project, just run the open rewrite, you will get a diff, and from that point on, you can decide, okay, this is good enough, or I need to do some more changes. So should you migrate? And that, as always, really depends. It's what kind of project are you running? Think about, do they add value? So if you clarify your code, I would say definitely go to records. If you need high speed, high volume performance, again, do consider records. So maybe move everything there. It can also help you, as mentioned, if you start breaking your tests when you migrate to records, because you thought your code was immutable, help you find bugs in your code you didn't know about, you weren't aware of. So overall, I do think they add value. If it's a lot of work and the application works as is, then yeah, again, it depends. So some more in-depth information about this. To prepare this talk, I wrote 3 blogs, including the last one about copy off with examples on how it performs better because it copies the pointer. You can find them at this application or this blog. And I've also shared the code that you've seen here, along with well, my socials. If you have any follow-up questions, you can find me typically walking around. I'm not always at the ING booth, but you work in Evan or in Shirt, so it's easy. And if you can give some feedback, that would be appreciated, both in the app or using this QR code. And thank you for your time. My time is up in 10 seconds, so.